I'm Andy Masich. I'm the president and CEO here at the Heinz History Center. Welcome, everyone. Most of you know that the History Center was recognized just this year by USA Today as the best history museum in America. Isn't that something? Well, we are delighted, and we're going to milk it for all it's worth, let me tell you. But we have a wonderful exhibit up right now called A Woman's Place. And the panel that's here with me tonight is going to tell you how that came about, tell you some of the great stories that are in it, answer any questions that you may have about A Woman's Place, and we're just going to have a conversation. And that's what this is all about, is cocktails and conversation. The Bank of America was the sponsor of this event tonight, so be nice to anyone you see from Bank of America. We appreciate their support. And tonight, with me are Leslie Przybylek. She was the lead curator on this project. Leslie is our senior curator here at the Heinz History Center. Anne Madarasz, who's our chief curator and also the director of the Western Pennsylvania Sports Museum, played a major role in the creation of A Woman's Place. And Emily Ruby, our curator, also pitched in, and together they assembled more than 300 objects from 12 or 13 lenders and created a 10,000 square foot exhibit about the women who made history right here in Western Pennsylvania. That's what we're going to talk about tonight, and you're going to hear it from these ladies who created the exhibition, along with our designers, other curators, historians, archivists, who all pitched in to make A Woman's Place. So are you ready? All right. You know, as they were telling me what they wanted to talk about tonight, I started to think about the things that I liked the best about this exhibit. And just to get the ball rolling, there were three women that really struck me in this group of, there are probably over 100 women that are recognized in the exhibit. But there's, of course, Nellie Bly, who was 16 years old when she moved to Pittsburgh from Cochran's Mills, Elizabeth Jane Cochran. And she was one of Michael Cochran's 13 daughters. And she came here, a young woman, and when she saw that article in the Pittsburgh Dispatch saying, "What are girls good for?" Well, she gritted her teeth. She wrote a scathing rebuttal. She was 21 years old at the time. And the editor of the Pittsburgh Dispatch liked her so much, or liked her articulate argument so much, that he hired her. And she became an investigative reporter. You'll probably hear more about her. But of course, she goes around the world in 72 days, breaking any record ever dreamed of in the world. 25,000-mile journey in 72 days, in days before air transportation, 1889. And then there's Rosie the Riveter. I love Rosie's story. You know, 50,000 women go to work in the mills and factories during World War II and keep this war machine going. The Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania make more steel than all the Axis powers put together, and the war material and other related material during World War II amazed the world. Well, it was women who were doing that. And of course, that Rosie the Riveter poster that was done by J. Howard Miller right here in Pittsburgh, that "We Can Do It" poster, well, that now today is the very symbol of women's empowerment. But I also like the fact that you have Deborah Todd, the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Her robes are in the exhibit. It's one of the first things you see when you come in. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is the oldest Supreme Court in America, 300 years old. It's older than the country. And to have the very first woman Supreme Court justice, her story told in this exhibit, I think brings us right up to date. But those are just some of the things that struck me as you developed this exhibit. I'd like to ask you, how did this exhibit come about? What was the impetus, and who came up with the idea even?
It was, as I think one of the kind of main themes of the exhibit is the power of the collective, of many, many women working together. And in this case, it really was the power of multiple members on a team. And it really came out of the pandemic originally. We, like many organizations, had been looking at doing something to connect and celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And of course, when COVID happened, we weren't able to follow through with those plans at the time, and frankly, it turned into a much greater opportunity after the fact. As we came back to it and started talking, we realized that we had a wonderful opportunity to go beyond that and to really dig into our collections to see who was represented, what are the big stories that are there, and then what do we hope to find? And the exhibit really came out of that. It was a team effort that started with this realization that there's this rich vein of history that in some cases, especially with the Sports Museum, we had really started to talk about, that there were many more stories to tell.
Mm-hmm. Well, the tough thing is not do you have enough women to include, but who do you leave out? And how did you decide who to include, what stories to tell in this exhibition?
And I will start with, I know we all have different stories, and in some cases, there are people there who were kind of obvious, you have to have her in there. Nellie Bly, of course, is one. In some instances, we were fortunate, in fact, in that case, very early on, to secure a really important loan. If you've been to the exhibit and toured it, you know that we have her fantastic little travel bag that she used in her around-the-world trip. And if you know her story and this idea about the editors saying, oh, you can't do that, you'll take too much luggage. And to me, that little bag says, I'll show you. It doesn't, forget about luggage. This is all I need. We were fortunate to get some major loans, but at the same time, there were people who I know we dug and dug and dug. And so in a couple cases, there are people who are in there, but we would have loved to have found more. And then there were some wonderful discoveries along the way. There were collections. There's a marvelous, marvelous collection of material from a woman named Peggy Skillen, who worked as an illustrator with Sesame Street. Mm-hmm. We were able to get that collection, honestly, because we were doing the exhibit and could say, oh my gosh, look, this opportunity is coming up. It's coming up right now. And we were able to bring that in. So it was a real combination. And
so when you say Peggy Skillen, who did she represent? What did she do for Sesame Street?
Peggy Skillen was a graduate of Carnegie Tech, and I have to say, we could do a whole sub-series within the exhibit about Carnegie Tech grads. She worked in some of the early years of Sesame Street, and we're still working out the details. Sesame Street was a very revolutionary show because it set out consciously from the beginning to depict this world of the urban streets, African-American, Latino populations that hadn't really been on TV before, and they went out and they were seeking illustrators who were from those communities as well. And so from what we can tell right now, it looked like what she was doing is continuity work, helping to create the concepts for characters like you'll see down there. Cookie Monster is one who's very recognizable, and we know she's credited as the illustrator for the episode in which Mr. Snuffleupagus, and now I know how to spell that, was introduced on Sesame Street. So this great, we talk about Mr. Rogers and all these milestones in public television. Well, here was someone else with a great chapter to add to that.
There are a lot of hidden histories within this exhibit. Who were the women that you wanted to recognize? Anne and Emily? Who were the ones that really struck you as underappreciated?
So I specifically worked on that first timeline that you see in the exhibition. So it's like a battle for equality. How did women, fight for equality? So I felt it was really important in that section to talk about a lot of women that were not just advocating for women's rights, but women that were active in the civil rights movement and in the disability rights movement. So we were really working to make it a more diverse representation of women through time as well. So, we were looking to document women like Alma Speed Fox, who was a civil rights leader, but she was very active in the women's movement as well. Still looking for great objects from her if you have any. But women like Eleanor Schmiel, who was a leader in the National Now movement, was from Western Pennsylvania. So, and of course, all the women mother advocates in the disability rights movement, like Jenny Thornburg, to name one. But there was all these women that we really wanted to tell their stories.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, Andy, it was really, the sports section of the exhibit, which is one of the areas I worked on. We have wonderful stories in the Sports Museum, and everybody said, oh, you're going to talk about the pennies, you're going to talk about the passion. And for me, it was really, no, we need to tell some new stories. We had some great things in our collection that had never been out, and I think that's true for all of us, every section we covered. But it was also an opportunity to reach further, and some of that came to our door. As people began to hear what we were working on, we began to get calls from people like the skill and material that Leslie talked about. So for me, it was, Jody Polk, who's the first girl to score a point in a WPIL football game in 1994. That's 30 years ago. Who knows that name? A lot of people know it now. And that's been one of the great things, to see these stories come to the fore that are important and recognized, but in many ways are brand new again to our audience and to the public of this region. So that, for me, was a goal. Let's tell the stories people expect, but let's really push the envelope. Let's tell some new stories. Let's get some new collections. And it's been a huge benefit. Jody's in there. Tomorrow morning, I'll be talking to the girl who was the first girl to score a touchdown in a WPL football game. So there's an impact and legacy from this exhibit that's really expanding our opportunity to tell new stories in the future.
One of the things that museums can do uniquely that academic historians can't always do, authors of books can't do, makers of films can't do, is that we have the genuine article, three-dimensional objects that are touchstones to the past. They're evidence of the past that give an authenticity to stories that maybe doesn't always come through when you're reading it on a page. What are some of the objects or the artifacts that you discovered either in our own collections or out there in the world that you think this group ought to know about?
I'll say one of the things that I was most excited about was in 2006, Annie Houghton became the first girl to ever win the WPIL boys tennis singles championship. And at that time, I called her up and I said, we'd love to have your tennis racket. We'd love to have your tennis shoes. Well, we've had those since then. But I knew the story was bigger. And when I was researching her story for an article in our magazine, and I realized her sister, 6 years earlier, had been the first girl to win the boys doubles championship. And then both of them and their two brothers go on to West Point. So I reached out. Somebody said to me, well, how'd you find it? I said, LinkedIn. We're internet detectives just like the rest of you. I reached out to her and said, hey, we're doing this exhibit. I'd love to represent you in a broader way and your military history and story, and Kate's as well. And we built this beautiful partnership and have this great story. And 3 times I think we brought out Kate's dress uniform for West Point to show. We showed it at the board meeting.
Yeah, right.
And 3 men said to me, what guy's uniform is that? Is that from the Civil War? I'm like, no, this is a woman's West Point jacket. Yeah. So it's a nice way, even within the institution, to educate, to share, but to expand those partnerships and stories. So that's probably one of my favorite ones.
And they didn't just win a state championship. They won it in the boys' division, right? And how tough was it for them to even be accepted to compete?
Well, I don't know about you two, and you can certainly answer the question. A lot of these women that we talk to will say, for Annie, she was injured, couldn't play girls tennis. She wasn't trying to make a statement. She wasn't trying to push an agenda. She just wanted to play tennis. She was good at something. She wanted to participate. She wanted to have that opportunity. So she asked, can I play boys tennis? So it was difficult, but they weren't there sometimes to break
As
the barriers.
pioneers,
As
yeah.
pioneers to
Yeah.
break those barriers. They were there to do the thing they loved and that they had a passion for.
Mm-hmm.
And when they opened those doors, it opened the door to other people
Mm-hmm.
who came behind them.
And I would agree. I mean, sometimes very small pieces that seem modest just as the object really speak volumes in that same thing. I know I tended to work on the sections that had some of the older stories, and so I didn't have as many interactions like you had with Jody Polk, but really in the section on the press and media, and you have this very famous story of Nellie Bly, but then you also have these great little pieces from a woman like Bessie Bramble, who was an early journalist, or there's this little ceramic, and it's actually a rooster, but it's the News Hen Award, and it's this reminder the Women's Press Club of Pittsburgh is the second oldest press club of its kind that's still active and still going in this city, and we were fortunate to partner with them, and this modest little, I'll call it a chicken, was the symbol of this whole group of women over the course of time who worked to broaden this field. And you're right, Anne. I mean, what we heard from people again and again is that they weren't necessarily trying to be the pioneers. They were just trying to do good work. They're trying to do what matters to them. And that comes across again and again and again.
I will say, so we have a real lack, but it's growing, but we had a real lack of things related to the women's movement in Pittsburgh, and we had this really vibrant movement here in the 70s that is really just starting to kind of be explored, and so we got this donation right before we started working on the exhibit of a quilt from a woman that was an activist. It was a t-shirt quilt, and it was all her t-shirts from the 70s, and it really gave you this great glimpse into this very active community in Pittsburgh. So it was everything from the Feminist Karate Union T-shirt to Bloomer's Restaurant to Now T-shirts. So it gave you this picture and this insight into this world, and it led then to all these other women in the community because of that quilt and the things on it. Then a whole group of women came together that were involved in the Feminist Karate Union and donated a whole group of material that documented, that organization. And that was an organization that was really crucial to them because this is a time when people were finally starting to talk about violence against women in a public way. And this was an organization that supported women, gave them a sense of empowerment, and taught them these self-defense skills. And it was so important to these women that some of them today are still very active in martial arts. And so it was just really impactful to see them all come together. And in fact, there's a picture of all of them on the screen. You'll see a big group of women, and those are all the women from the Feminist Karate Union.
You discovered a lot of things in our own collection and elsewhere. Are there any other discoveries that you think would surprise people, objects that you came across?
So we always try, we're an affiliate of the Smithsonian, and that partnership's very important to us. We always try and have a Smithsonian artifact. And we worked for a long time to get...
That was a multi-year effort.
But what we wanted to have was a uniform from the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, which lasted from 1943 to 1954. A professional women's baseball league, much like the women who went into the factories during World War II. Leslie and I talk so much about these commonalities. These women have this opportunity, and after the war, it kind of drifts away. But the Smithsonian agreed to lend us this uniform. All we had seen was it on their kind of website, and the photos they sent was the front of the uniform. So the day we unpacked that uniform and pulled it out of the crate, I walked around the back, and there was a 7, number 7, Betsy Yoakum, it's number 7. And you think, why? That's from the very first year. 60 women were chosen in this nation to play in the very first year, and that may well be the only uniform that survives from that year. And the Smithsonian, they have so many things. They don't necessarily always do the in-depth research that we might do. So I was excited to be able to tell them something about what they had, but also to be able to tell that story of kind of the genesis of this league through that uniform. That was like an exciting moment for me.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the piece that's up on the screen right now is a great example of how an exhibit like this because it kind of encourages you to get into the archives and dig, that one there is actually showing a story that we didn't know much about. It's a YWCA image from the 1990s. It was for a women's sort of day-long workshop advocating for new careers and new identities and new pathways. And so even a really fantastic image like that, which I have to say, when you're working on a project like this, you are sorting through stories and news clippings and photos, and sometimes you'll just come to something and you're like, oh yes, that image, that has to be in there. And so sometimes it's a little modest discovery like that becomes an image that really has been one of the pieces that has gotten the message out there about the show.
So we were working on the building community section, and we just happened at the same time to get a donation from Shirley Yee, whose family was very involved in the Chinatown here in Pittsburgh. And so I asked her, how would the women in your community, how did they create community? How, what did they have organizations that they were involved in? Is there a way we can document it in this exhibit, because you don't have any representation of Asian women in the exhibit? And her response was, well, mahjong, of course. And so she also had her mother's mahjong set, and she had pictures of her playing mahjong. So that was a really nice addition that came in right at the last minute too. So.
That's terrific. Are there any sort of objects or artifacts that got away, things that you wish you had had for this exhibit, but either couldn't get or couldn't find?
Oh, and I know everybody knows what I'm going to say. There was one that we chased and chased and chased. I had this vision early on. We were really hoping to get a large Mary Cassatt painting. I mean, some of you may well be aware. Of course, the family was originally from Western PA. She had some other early support from this area in terms of launching her painting career. Her role really was this fascinating part, not just of her pioneering work as an artist, but also the reality of the suffrage debate. She actually became a suffrage supporter. She worked with one of her donors out of New York City to offer an exhibit that was raising money for suffrage. But her brother, who was one of the heads of the Pennsylvania Railroad, very prominent in the state and the nation, his wife was the leading anti-suffrage leader at one point for the state of Pennsylvania. And so we tried and tried and tried. I think we sent, 12 letters trying to get a painting. Unfortunately, and I like to think of it as great minds think alike, we picked the timing for our exhibit at the same moment that some of you may have seen the exhibit. The Philadelphia Museum of Art mounted the largest show on Mary Cassatt's work in the last 25 years. I will say I still feel like they could have done with one less painting and we could have had it, but instead, we were fortunate. The Carnegie Museum of Art loaned us a couple of prints, which we have swapped back and forth. But that was one that got away. I would say there's a couple some pioneering African-American women down there whose names appear in the media section. Hazel Garland, Toki Shoke Johnson, and Mary Dee. We searched and searched. Mary Dee was a radio announcer, did really pioneering work in the Hill District. Before the station was bought, it changed from a community kind of format to country western. She left this area, and that's one that's on my list to still see if we can't get anything more that documents her radio work.
And I would say Selma Burke is another artist who we very badly wanted to have a piece of her art in the exhibit. Not only was she an acclaimed artist and community builder, came to Pittsburgh near the end of her career, we honored her at the History Center in our very first class of history makers. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to tell her story. There was one piece of art in Pittsburgh so large that it couldn't be moved, large sculpture, and we ended up with a plaque that recognizes her contributions, but not exactly what we wanted. So we sometimes had to make do with things to tell those stories that we felt just absolutely had to be in the exhibition, but we couldn't get the exact right thing that we wanted. So finding those strategies to make those stories come alive, but not necessarily in the way we wanted.
This was one exhibit. This institution's been around for almost 150 years as the Historical Society of Western Pennsylvania, and then the Heinz History Center. We're going to be doing many more exhibits in the years ahead. Well, what are you looking for out there? Are there individuals, that you want to better document? Are there topics that you'd like to explore more? How can this group here help be our eyes and ears out there and start to pull in some of those collections so future generations can learn more about the contributions that women have made in Western Pennsylvania?
I think that's a great question, Andy. And for all of you, I know first of all, we're very open at the beginning and the ending of the exhibit saying, hey, if there's someone who you were coming here expecting to see and they're not here, we do really want to know about those people. We know there are still a lot of gaps. I know I have done a lot of work in the past 5, 6, 7 years, ever since we offered our World War II exhibit here, to do more to kind of bolster our collections on the real Rosies who worked here. I would love to continue to find more actual artifact material on the women who worked at Westinghouse and U.S. Steel. And, we just, this past weekend, we got a beautiful email from a woman who toured the exhibit and saw it with family members and said, oh my gosh, it reminded me of my grandmother who did work with the cement company. She sent us a wonderful set of scanned images. I saw them for the first time just this morning. For me, any of that material would be welcome. I know that both Anne and Emily have their own whole wish list of people that they are looking for.
And I will say the doors are opening because of the exhibit, and I'm getting a lot more calls from people because they're seeing things in the exhibit. So it's really wonderful. Of course, I'm going to go back to the feminist movement in Pittsburgh because that's a lot of what I focused on in the 70s. So we're getting a lot more material, but there's still major gaps in that collection of the women that were really leading that movement. So objects that document, their impact. Women like Wilma Scott Hyde that started the first local Pittsburgh chapter of NOW and then went on to lead the national movement. I mentioned Eleanor Schmiel, Alma Speed Fox. So there's a lot more women that we could document in a more tangible way. But I think that this is a great first step in that.
And there are certain categories where we touch on those ideas in other places, or we're thinking about things. Industry is one, and innovation, as Leslie just mentioned. But I also think, we came across people in their collections like Anne Feeney, who I didn't know, but of course the great labor and protest songstress. Emily and I shared a wonderful intern this summer from Gettysburg College, who we said, look, we're interested in Anne Feeney. We've made some connections to her family, to her community. We want to know about that kind of the milieu and the environment in which she worked and her role and how this all played out in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. So he did research on kind of music as the soul of protest movements and social change, with Anne at the center, but building that network of people who are associated with her. So that's something that we'll have the opportunity. But there are many things, Pittsburgh has changed in terms of looking at women in leadership, women in the boardroom, women in politics, women breaking that glass ceiling. So we're thinking about the past, but we're also thinking about what are the stories, the history that's being made right now that we need to think about collecting for the future.
And I do think that's one of the things this has opened up doors where people now realize, oh my gosh, I see that cooking implement, that business item, and they're coming back to us and kind of suggesting names. And I'd say I see a couple people in the audience who I recognize from this past weekend program, the launch for Brian Butko and Sue Morris's book on Bettis Airport. And for me, that is another big section. We were looking at, there's an amazing history of women aviators here in Pittsburgh. And aside from a few small pieces and some fantastic photo collections, that's another one where if you have a family member out there, someone who knows someone, we would love to hear about it.
Go ahead.
I was just going to bring up one story, too, that I want Leslie to talk about. But there are some great collections that we had that, when were we ever going to, get this story out there? And this was such a great exhibit to do that. And Transmissions by Lucille is just a great story. So
that, I will say that, and if you're not familiar, the story of Transmissions by Lucille is this amazing story. It was a collection that we were fortunate enough to get a few years ago, but we hadn't really used it yet. And for me, it's also this reminder that what can make a woman really, really famous might not always be the very thing that made the most impact in her community. If you've seen the exhibit, she actually appears in two places, at the beginning and then in the section on work. She was a 29-year-old woman when she got divorced. She had a couple kids. She had to figure out a way to make a living. And this is her own account of the story, she got a job in an auto parts store. She had aspired to be an English teacher, but she got a job in an auto parts store. And she said, I hated sounding dumb, so I started learning about the parts, and I learned the manuals, and then she learned how to do auto mechanic work. When she came back to Pittsburgh, she started this shop. The shop is still in Verona, Transmissions by Lucille. And first, there's just this image. You don't think of transmissions and think of a woman mechanic to begin with. But our collection includes not just multiple of her work uniforms, but all these letters that people wrote to her, thanking them for the care she gave their daughters and their family members. And she spent probably 20, 30 years offering classes that demystified car care for women and girls. In the 1990s, and there are multiple stories actually in the exhibit where the trajectory of a woman's life, the way people out in the community knew about them, were changed because of this sort of sweet spot, the convergence of cable TV and the internet. And in the case of Lucille, the story got out there in the media that, there's this woman, and by this point she's this white-haired, they called her the white-haired grandma, who drove a power car. She became hugely popular in the media. She ended up on the David Letterman show, Jay Leno, all these different TV shows. She had her literal 15 minutes, the Andy Warhol version of 15 minutes of fame. She was on the TV show Home Improvement, and we have that material. But, when I do tours, I talk with people about, is it really that brief period of TV fame that made the impact in the community, or is it the many, many years that she literally spent saying to women, you can learn this too. You can learn how to deal with that car. Don't just get taken in the auto mechanic store. And so she's just this cool collection of really great stuff and a wonderful story, but then she also illustrates those kind of different issues that we face with women's history and with history overall, of what is the piece that really made an impact in people's lives and in the community. And thank you, Emily, for prodding that one.
I know we talked early on in the exhibit development about, we've got a lot of fashions, a lot of women's fashions in the collection. And we don't want to turn this into a fashion show, but there's some really great stuff here. And that is part of the story. What are some of the great fashions that are in the show that you think you'd like to highlight?
You guys are, Emily, you're the fashion person. I was going to say, one of you take that one first.
Well, you can't beat the Alcoa aluminum bikini by Oscar de la Renta.
Aluminum bikini.
That one's hard to top, but I'll let Emily take the...
Anne Fogarty. Yeah.
Yes, Anne Fogarty is one. She was a local Pittsburgher, but she went on to become a major fashion designer, and she was kind of known for that 50s new silhouette. And we have one of her gowns in the exhibit as well, and that's someone who we want to document more as well, and we're looking to get a few more of her pieces in the collection, but for the exhibit we did, get one of her dresses. So.
It was a big challenge, though, Andy, that we talked about a lot, is what we tend to have to document women's history are pieces of clothing. That's what people save. And how do we take that and use it to our advantage and not turn this into a fashion show? So how do we tell those stories? And one of my favorite pieces that we have in the show is Bertha Lammy's wedding dress. So Bertha graduates from Ohio University, and she's believed to be the first woman electrical engineer in the country. She goes to work at Westinghouse in 1893, and she is acclaimed across the country as this woman engineer. If you've seen our billboards, you've seen the one woman in the group of men. That's the 1904 engineers at Westinghouse, and her picture is highlighted in the middle. So it's this wonderful story, but what happens is she meets another engineer at Westinghouse, they fall in love, and they get married in 1905. And so she has to lose her job. She can't stay at Westinghouse, which she never saw as a problem. She loved being a mother. She had a daughter, Florence, who went on to be a very successful physicist, PhD, worked at the Bureau of Mines her whole career. But it's this wonderful way to talk about what's going on in culture at that time, this kind of trailblazer, but also in the context of that kind of pivotal rites of passage moment. So it's not necessarily the most fashionable piece, but for me, it's one of the most impactful pieces of clothing because there's so many great issues around it that you can talk, right there with her T-square and her drafting tools is this wedding dress. So that for me is a key piece.
I think Anne Feeney's T-shirt too in the opening, where it says "A woman's place is in her union." That to me is like the best piece of women's clothing.
And I was going to say, I'm glad you brought up the Anne Feeney. Andy mentioned the "We Can Do It" poster at the beginning, and it appears on 2 different T-shirts in the exhibit. There's Anne Feeney's really great T-shirt at the beginning, and then one of the fashion pieces that is a favorite of mine, and it's all the way in the back, but it's a reminder that clothing can have great meaning, and it's a meaning that can carry on and change for different definitions. If you've gone all the way in the back, there's a section back there in the kind of World War II area that deals with the Girls of Steel robotic team, another CMU piece I know. And the students, when they started this all-women's robotic team, the students were asked, to kind of think about who the mascot might be, and they picked Rosie. They picked "We Can Do It." And so if you look at that T-shirt, the blue T-shirt, it has this version of the "We Can Do It" woman kind of in outline, but her arm is a robotic arm. And then they have a flannel shirt on top, and they wear these little red bandanas with the white polka dots. And I've even seen photos where at competitions they have this cape. And it's this great image, you'll see it back there, of a whole team of girls with this kind of Rosie-inspired costuming. And it's just a reminder that clothing matters. And yes, we have some beautiful wedding dresses. We have a beautiful gown in the exhibit that was designed by a woman who we really didn't know much about until we started working with the exhibit. And then you have these fantastic T-shirts, which as objects that tell stories, have as many stories to tell as the fancier outfits.
Elsie Hillman, when she was still with us, donated something to the collection. What was that?
There is one of her political dresses that she wore in 1968 to the Republican convention. So it's great to be able to tell her story. And I have to say, when we reached out to some of our history makers to invite them to be part of a project for this exhibition, Esther Barazone, who was the president of Chatham University, said, "I'm so glad. I don't feel that women like Elsie have ever gotten their due in this city. As acclaimed as she is, I don't think they've ever received the recognition they should have. And I'm so glad to see you doing this project and recognizing these women like her, like Esther, who wasn't talking about herself, who deserve to be, their stories should be preserved and shared." Okay. So even these women saw this as an important project to kind of bring these stories to light and to preserve them in the collection.
Before we open the conversation to questions, be thinking about your questions. There are people represented in the exhibition that are still with us. And some of them have come to see themselves in the exhibition, and they brought daughters and granddaughters with them. Are there any stories of the reactions of the people whose stories have been rediscovered or discovered for the first time, how has that impacted their lives and those of their family and friends?
I'll give one brief one, but I know you guys have the best. Anne has a couple really wonderful stories. I know in the kind of military section, there is a M4 Enigma machine, and there's a photo near it of Julia Parsons, a 103-year-old code breaker, who I'm happy to say was able to come to one of our Veterans Breakfast Club programs, and it was incredibly moving. In fact, it was in this space to watch the room kind of give her a standing ovation for acknowledgement to the work she had done. She was able to visit the exhibit, but it was a brief visit for that particular event. I know you both have some wonderful stories of family members and people who have come and where the story has kind of gone on and taken a life of its own.
Yeah, I think that's been probably the most gratifying part of this whole exhibition for us, is seeing the impact it's having on both the people that are still with us and their families, but also the people who it's their mother, grandmother, or they can relate to the stories in the exhibit. But I'll tell two quickly. One is the Houghtons, who have visited. The sisters don't live in Pittsburgh, but their parents still do. They've probably visited 4 or 5 times. So first Annie came with her kids, and we toured them around. And
These are the West Pointers.
the West Pointers, right, the tennis players. And then Kate came with her children. And so they were up in, they were running up to the Kidsburg and up in Discovery. And then I said, well, don't you want to go in and see the exhibit, the women's exhibit? And Kate's daughter goes, no. And I said, but your mom's in there. And she turned to her mom, she goes, Mom, you're famous? So that was cute. For me, probably Jody Polk has been one of the most gratifying. She's the woman who was the football player, scored the first points when she played for Penn Trafford. She has since been inducted into the Penn Trafford Hall of Fame. Homecoming night, she was honored on field before the game. And the 2 girls who were playing that night, the 2 teams that were playing that night, both of them had girls who were kickers. So there's a wonderful photo that'll rotate through here of seeing these 3 women together on the field, kind of the legacy piece in the middle, and the girls that she's inspired that you can do this. And she said to me, I was forgotten. And now look at all that has happened. It's kind of changed my life. It's so gratifying to feel like my accomplishment means something. So those are great moments for us. Talk about Ginny.
I was going to say, so maybe more impactful for me, Ginny Thornburg, who obviously is not forgotten in history, the former First Lady of Pennsylvania. But, we were really honoring her for her disability advocacy, and we just had such wonderful moments with her. She came in and she toured. We were able to go to her home and have lunch with her, and also find out that she still had a lot of her papers that she didn't think anyone wanted. So we were able to, take some of her papers and really document that part of her life, her disability advocacy for her son. And so that was pretty amazing.
And I'd say that's a reminder, too, that we are always interested not only in the objects, but also papers, archival collections, things like that. So just to put a plug in for our library and archives, too.
Yeah. We're interested in the story. That's what we are. We're the People Museum, and we tell the stories of people. And sometimes we do it through artifacts and archives and photographs and film and oral histories. And our curators weave all of those elements together to create a story, a narrative. What were you going to say, Anne?
I was just going to say, beyond the women who are in the exhibit, we've done a number of tours throughout the run of the exhibit just for women's groups or members of our board or people from different, who support the History Center, who've come in. And to see those women, you think, like things I thought, I don't know how this is going to go over, that last wall community, to see women spend a half an hour, like you can't drag them out of there. Someone will say, Anne, give them a quick tour, 45 minutes. It's like 2 hours. There is no quick tour.
A quick tour is impossible.
2 hours later, but to see them interact and to talk about it and to remember and to recognize and to feel empowered and seen, that's been really gratifying and fulfilling for us.
Well, I know there are a number of people here who have some questions for you, things that they've seen in the exhibit, things that they've experienced that they'd like your take on. Jessica Smythe has a microphone. She's going to bring it to you if you have a question. And while you're thinking about those questions, one of the things that I think has been great about this exhibition is the PR and marketing that's been done. I saw Brady Smith here earlier. I don't know if he's still here, but he's our Chief Communications Officer. And you probably noticed some of those billboards that have been all over town. Very creative marketing with using historical photographs and witty sayings, but that's Brady's work and his team's work. So keep your eyes peeled for those around town. Yes, there's a question?
This is a quick question. I'm just curious.
Identify yourself.
Oh.
Stand up, Anne.
I'm Anne Zacharias. I have a quick question. The Nellie Bly bag, is that part, where do we get that? Is that part of our collection?
That, unfortunately, is not our collection. That is on loan from the Freedom Forum. They used to run the museum in Washington, D.C. Right now, the material is kind of housed in Maryland, but they displayed the bag. It came through an author, and it was connected with a larger project that they had done at the time. They had, of course, Nellie is such a kind of milestone story that they had featured her. The museum, and I won't go into the whole story, but it's no longer in operation in Washington, D.C., and so we were lucky enough to be able to secure the bag on loan from them.
It's a little alligator bag, no bigger than that. And as Leslie said, all the men journalists poo-pooed her around the world ambition, saying there's no way a woman could travel around the world without steamer trunks and an entourage. And so she put everything in this tiny little alligator bag that's on exhibit.
I'll say we would still love, I will admit, we would love to find some other Nellie Bly artifacts, even a real copy of her original publications, any of them. A lot of what she did, in a way, she kind of used the social media of the day. She published a lot of her things in these they weren't very expensive. They were inexpensive pamphlets, and so it got the story out there to a lot of people, but it means today that they're a lot harder to find. There's an example of the game that's in the exhibit, and because the game was produced for many, many years, it's actually more accessible for museums like us to find copies of the game that we can acquire. The game is part of our collection, so we'd love to find more.
Or if you've got one of the milk cans that she patented. Remember, Nellie Bly started as an investigative reporter, became a war correspondent, a world traveler, then an entrepreneur. She has a patent to her name. Her business made 55-gallon drums and milk cans, and she actually received a patent for one of those. So, she was a Renaissance woman. That's one of the reasons we thought she was worthy of recognition at the Pittsburgh International Airport. You know that figure of Franco making the Immaculate Reception and George Washington standing there looking regal, and then between them is this tiny little woman, this 21-year-old woman with an alligator purse. That's Nellie Bly. So the next time you're at the airport, tip your hat to Nellie.
All right, I have our next question over here.
Yes, hi. My name is Lorraine Starsky, and I'm a longtime supporter of the History Museum. In fact, I was a member of the Western Pennsylvania History Society in Oakland. So many decades. I love history, and I can't say how I've waited a long time for this exhibit. I can't say how thrilled I am, and I'm hoping it's just going to be the beginning of really looking at the role that women, area women have played in many of our institutions. In public health, we had Anna B. Heldman, and she was based in the Hill District, and one of the streets in the Hill District was renamed in her honor. So Heldman Street in the Hill District. And she did amazing pioneering work on women's health, infant health, which I think is a very pertinent issue today because of infant maternal mortality. So I would love to share some of my ideas on this, because I think some of the fields that have been traditionally dominated by women and overlooked for that unfortunate reason, nursing being one of them. She was a nurse. I think we have such a rich history here with all the different nursing programs that it would be nice to do that. And there's so many other things I can think of that would really be useful for women that have sort of been forgotten, but they made she was known as the angel of the Hill District. She worked in the Hill District for 40 years.
Leslie, did you want to?
Yeah, I will say she was on the list of, I wish we had found more for her. I think there's a photo in the collection that shows her. And public health was one of the areas where, because in the final version of the exhibit, you make decisions about how you're going to feature things, and we tended to give weight to costumes and material where we had a named person represented by that piece. And so, for example, we have a public health nurse uniform, but because we didn't have as many, I agree with you, it's an area that we really need to kind of develop some more on. And Anne B. Heldman was one of the people. I would love to find some other artifacts connected with her. She's not the only person representing that. I mean, we do have the one coat related to the mother of Montefiore in there. But I agree with you, and she's one where we'd be happy to talk to you. And there is some nursing material in other parts of the innovation as well. We got a couple great comic books and some stories related to the COVID pandemic and nursing connected with that. But there are some other public health stories in there that it would also be great to document more fully.
It's important to remember, too, that an exhibition is just one of the tools in the public historian's kit. There are magazine articles, there are books, there are documentary films, there are podcasts, there are blogs, there are performances. There are many ways that we can preserve and share the stories of the past. So we really do want to hear from you, and we can find ways to incorporate those stories and share them. Was there a question in the back there?
Yes, I have another question here. And just a reminder, if you have a question, just raise your hand or catch my eye, and I'll come to you next.
Thank you. As an educator, I have to stand up. Ann Dugan, founder of the Institute for Entrepreneurial Excellence at the University of Pittsburgh. So you'll see my comment. I was so excited for what you said about the railroad magnate's wife, about transmissions by Lucille. There are so many entrepreneurial women out here in the Western Pennsylvania area that are just not known. And I have to say that Elsie Hillman was, just that you mentioned her tonight is just a miracle, because I would tell you that in the, I'll say 80s, 90s, and 2000s, we were one at the table. I mean, at that time, it was in the business world, not in the nonprofit and charity world, but definitely business world. So thank you. And my recommendation, besides all of the good things that you said today, is really celebrate the entrepreneurial women that are from the 70s, 80s, and forward. They're not all in tech. They're in transmissions. They're in all kinds of things, but they are working every day very hard, for our community and providing jobs.
Thanks, Anne.
And the McGinnis sisters story in the exhibition
McGinnis
is one of the
that's a
great
great one.
examples of just what you're talking about.
And there have been a couple other overtures or talking to people related to the Pennsylvania Women's Hall of Fame. I'm talking to a couple other people related to entrepreneurial organizations. In addition to the McGinnis sisters, there are also a couple other things. Helen Manarino, Pierogies Plus, the story of someone in the business she started in McKees Rock. So it's an area where we're hoping to find more. We're really hoping the exhibit, again, kind of opens new pathways.
Wonderful. We have a question here, a couple over here, and then I'm going to make it to that side.
Hi, my name's Dave DeZombach, and I have a question about Marcia Davenport. There may have been something in the exhibit about her that I missed, but I didn't think there was anything there. Author of one of the most famous novels about Pittsburgh, Valley of Decision, and she had a remarkable life, part of which she spent here in Pittsburgh. Do we have anything in the collection related to her? Did you consider her for the exhibit?
Oh, I will say that the authors are, especially in some ways, a tricky wicket in that area. The name, I've looked at her in connection with some other research we've done. We don't have a lot in the collection here. I actually had done some work by looking at some of the material related to her that's in the Library of Congress. They have more of her collection material there. I know we had the same sort of challenge with, frankly, people like Rachel Carson and Ida Tarbell, who are really well known as authors. And you can get a copy of the book, and the book could be displayed, but we don't have much in the way of personal material. So she's one that I admit we need to do a little bit more digging on.
Her connection with Jan Masich and that whole movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in some cases, and especially for activities in the way of an author, when we, as a curator, you think about what are the tools of the trade? What are the things that involve that person? And if I'm looking at someone who worked in a steel factory during World War II, I have their helmet, I have jackets, I have pieces that were with them. It's harder for people like authors because they haven't necessarily left a lot behind. So we faced a little bit of that challenge with the people who were in there, and she's one where, yes, you're right. I mean, are there some other things that could be used to represent her story moving forward?
Was
Wonderful.
there another question?
I am going to get to that person. I'm going to get you real quick.
Okay. And we'll just take 2 more, okay? Because we've got to wrap it up because there are people eager to get to the gift shop and use their 15% discount.
Hi, I'm Jim Wojcik with the Historical Society of Mount Lebanon, and this is a wonderful exhibit, and I just wondered if you folks are thinking about taking a subset or parts of this exhibit and putting it on the road for us local historical societies here in the tri-state area to spread the word and spread the knowledge. That's what I hope for. Any chance?
It's a great idea, Jim, and we've done that with some of our other big exhibits. We've sort of rendered them down to their essence and put them on the road to some of our affiliate museums, such as yours. So we'll see what we can do, because what we hope to do when we do that is send that core exhibit out and then have the local museums add their own material and embiggen it. That's what Bart Simpson is, embiggen the exhibit.
There is a subset of materials that we've identified that we can hopefully, in the next year or so, work into some of our long-term exhibits as well.
Right.
So we do have a list that we've developed, and we're kind of strategizing on how we can save some of the pieces that are out on display now and make them work with exhibitions that are here for the long term at the History Center.
Right.
Wonderful. I have your next question over here.
Hello, my name is Miranda, and first of all, I'm a collections coordinator at a museum that owns Selma Burke's and some cassettes, so I would like to talk to you afterwards, if possible. My question is, are any of these wonderful stories going to be incorporated into any of the permanent exhibitions upstairs or any rotating exhibitions in the future?
We just hinted at a bit of that question. And I'll say to you over here with Mount Lebanon, I know Bob Stakely and I have talked about that. He's been putting the word out for you too, so you're not the only one reminding us of that. We have worked internally to develop a list of some of the things that are out and places where they can go in the current exhibit. So the hope is that between the special collections on the 4th floor and the innovation exhibit on the 2nd floor, certainly some other things in the sports museum, that we will see more of that out there.
I think that's especially appropriate, Leslie, in our innovation exhibit. So many of these women are pioneers and innovators that weaving them through the innovation exhibit does make sense.
I have your next question
Was
over
there one
here.
more?
Yes, over here.
Hi, my name is Olivia. I'm an entrepreneur in the Pittsburgh area. I'm a CMU fellow right now. But I wanted to more so add to the conversation that you were speaking about with fashion. My business, I'm working to basically implement robotics and technology in the fashion development and production process. And I learned through that studying and innovating that the standardized size range that we all loosely choose from today, extra small to extra large, 2 to 4 to 6 to onward, is loosely based off of the patterns that they made for Rosie the Riveter in World War II. And it has not been changed since. And that pattern system is loosely based off a male fisherman, in case you're wondering. So I just wanted to add to that
That's
conversation because it was a piece of history that I didn't know about, even
Yeah.
like working in fashion and studying it for so long, that I was fascinated to know. And it's literally still what we use today. So that's why I'm doing what I'm
Thank you
doing.
for sharing. That's great. What, does that wrap us up, Jess, or was there another question?
Okay, I did call
You
on
promised
you earlier.
somebody?
I promised someone a question, so I want to squeeze in one more.
My name's Ramona Nelson, and Ramona Nelson. My voice is a little weak. And I was impressed as you talked about the difficulty and the complexity of taking an object and telling a story, as you were describing what you've done. In the 70s, I worked extremely hard, and only with the help of now was I able to get a credit card in my name as a woman. You know, and I, only with the help of now was I able to, no, at the time I was teaching on the faculty at Pitt. You know, and I wonder how you take an issue And what is the process of that, making that into an object that you could show and tell a story?
Do you have that original credit card?
Is it still open, and can we use it for our Christmas shopping?
No, it was Kaufman's and Gimbel's. No, Gimbel's was where I finally got the first credit card.
Good. Did you keep it?
That's a great question.
It really is a good question. That's what curators wrestle with. How do you deal with bigger issues using objects to tell a story?
Sometimes it starts with the object. In the best of all possible worlds, in that case, it would start with that credit card and with a name and a face, and then you tell the story out from there. We'll look for wonderful images. That's why we always, when we talk to people, when they call us and they say, oh, I have this object, our first question after that usually is, well, do you have a picture of yourself or the person involved with it? We love to kind of bring in images, but then it also involves our collection staff and our designers, where the pieces work together to kind of look at how do you take that one object, whether it's a credit card or some of the other objects we've talked about, a ceramic chicken or a piece from a sporting game, and you put the things around it that kind of give it a broader story, and you mine your own collection and you look for the different ways. Now we're talking about, media and new technology, new ways to do that. So it really is, it's an object by object challenge, and that's why the exhibit process takes so long, that you're really looking at each piece and then you weave all those stories together. I don't know if you have a little more to add to that.
I was going to say, I always say the trifecta is the object with an image of it in use, if possible, at the time period, and then an oral history. That's like the best. When you have all of those three things, that's so powerful. Often that does not happen, and that's okay. But when it does, that's a really wonderful moment for us as curators and storytellers. But definitely, yes, it starts with the object. So bring those credit cards in, ladies.
I think that is the key. It's storytelling, and that's the thing that history museums do that are different from other museums. We tell the stories of people, and sometimes we don't do it as well as we'd like to. Sometimes we revert to, showing an object and describing it. Well, that's just kind of show and tell. But if you can weave a story that grabs people, that they can relate to, then you've succeeded. When we look at an exhibition, we want to know, what are the takeaway ideas? What do we want people to go away knowing? And then we also ask, how do we want people to feel when they leave the exhibition? What have they learned, and how do they feel? Do they feel hopeful? Do they feel empowered? Do they feel sad or happy or proud? Those are the kinds of things that curators think about as they're weaving that story together with the objects they've found. Well, I'm afraid that brings us to the end of our evening tonight. I'm delighted that you took the time to come and be with us and learn a little bit more from our experts about how an exhibition like A Woman's Place is put together. I hope that you'll stay a little bit longer, talk with us, and if you'd like to purchase a membership as a gift item, that's great. There are people right outside the door there that'll help you. And I believe our gift shop, our museum store, is open for your enjoyment and Christmas shopping. So thank you all for coming. Thank you.